Live. Okay, hi, we are live, and I'm Steve Sabludowsky. We're going to be talking about Louisiana politics with Jeff Carrere and Jim Brown. We're waiting for Lauren Shahardy, and hopefully he'll be able to make it. He had a meeting he had to go to. So welcome, Jim and Jeff. I know that you guys are muted right now, but let me throw the question out at this point to Jim Brown. Jim, we had some incredible news, I guess, not that we didn't expect it, and that's David Vitter has decided to run for governor. And I'm just wondering, what's going on? Do you think he has a chance? He's leading right now according to the polls, but do you think that that he's going to continue with that? And what's your overall gut feeling about all this?
The Vitter announcement was no surprise. There had been rumors going around for months that he was seriously looking at it. A lot of people said, why would he give up a United States Senate seat to come back to Louisiana and get into the intricacies and the details and the controversies that just eat you alive on a local level? And so I think he thrives on that. If you look into the legislature, I think the happiest time David Vitter ever had was when he was in the Louisiana legislature, taking on Edwin Edwards and taking on whoever the governor was, and taking on the whole power structure. So I'm not surprised he ran and that he's running, number one, to tell you. Second of all, there's still an uphill fight for the Republicans to take over the U.S. Senate. So Vitter is, because of his seniority and a variety of things, he's not a major high-level Republican in Congress in Washington, and he's in a minority party. And so many friends have told me that Washington is about the loneliest place you could be right now, that nobody is friends unless you're within your immediate group. I don't think he and his wife are happy in Washington. So he's taking a look at coming back home, announcing he is, and I agree with you. He's the favorite, and there's a lot of unanswered questions about David Vitter. You either like him or you don't like him, and there's a lot of people who he's crossed who are mad at him, and it's a question of what kind of coalescing he can do. Steve, politics have a short lifespan, and your enemy today is your friend tomorrow, and so Vitter is the leading candidate. I think he's going to stay that way for a while. But I think he's got some healing to do amongst a number of people that he's stepped on. And if he can't do some healing, there's going to be a good opportunity for a Jay Dardenne, a John Kennedy, possibly a Democrat, to say, look, all this confrontation has ripped this state apart. We've got to bring it all together. So, yes, he's the leading candidate. He could well be elected, but he's got a long way to go in the healing process. And I don't know if he's really got it in him or not. That's the unanswered question. Okay,
Jeff.
John Kennedy is an interesting fellow. Kennedy is the state treasurer. He was worked in Governor Buddy Roemer's administration as to where he first emerged, ran the Department of Revenue, apparently did so in a very high caliber fashion, easily elected to the office he holds right now, treasurer, been there for I think 3 or 4 terms, has $3 million in the bank, and has been the most vocal advocate of taking on Governor Bobby Jindal of any other official in the state. And made a lot of friends in doing so. I think that the prognosticators like myself, and you go up to North Louisiana, Moon Griffon, you've got people down in New Orleans like Jeff. I think most of those of us who watch this closely are very highly impressed with John Kennedy.
Let me just say this. I guess you're talking about the whole thing Vitter. 2 observations I'd just like to share. One is, I think that a lot of people are jumping the gun and saying that the race is over, and that other people are just lay down for a coordination. I don't think that's true. I think that's this John Bell Edwards will see what he do. Some other people that jump in, so I don't think it's a coordination for their.
Okay, I think what we're being told.
Jay Dardenne is going to back away. As to if Vitter gets elected, then I think possibly Kennedy would play for that seat, possibly coming up in North Louisiana, and then some are even saying that maybe Bobby Jindal and David Vitter will switch seats.
Okay, I just want to mention, apparently, we have a bandwidth issue coming from Jeff. I think it's due to the weather. We've had a really horrible weather down here, especially where Jeff lives in the boondocks. Beautiful Mandeville. So, Jim, my question is, and you heard much of what Jeff said, and my question is, do you think that there's a deal going on between, say, Bobby Jindal and David Vitter?
I don't believe so. That there's been a lot of animosity between those two major political figures, the two major Republican figures in the state. Vitter has had no qualms about taking on Jindal, about supporting his own group of legislators, more conservative group of legislators, Tea Party types, and they've gotten right in the governor's face. So I don't think there's any love lost between the two of them. Having said that, politics make strange bedfellows, and it may be in each of their interests to put their act together. On the other hand, if Vitter wants to be vindictive, you might see him even, you might even see some discussion. And let me tell you about the discussions. You've got to be very, very careful. If you look at what's happened on the national scene up in New Jersey, up in Virginia now, for a statewide candidate to call David Vitter and say, "Look, I'm going to support you, but if you win, I want you to support me as for your seat in the U.S. Senate." That's a tit for tat. That would be a violation of federal law and probably state law. So there's some delicacies here in terms of who makes the decision. You might see a guy like John Kennedy end up supporting David Vitter quite aggressively, a feeling that if he does, maybe Vitter will appoint him as the U.S. Senate seat. So the dynamics of this thing, and you're talking to somebody that went through a governor's race in 1987 with Edwin Edwards, Buddy Roemer, Bob Livingston, Billy Posen, and I can tell you the game plan that you had today dramatically changed in the next week. There were discussions between all of us about who stayed in and who stayed out, and so the nuances of this thing, as Jeff has pointed out, this race is far from over. It has a long, long way to go. There will certainly be discussions between Bobby Jindal and David Vitter, and David Vitter and John Kennedy. They'll have, and all the candidates will do this. I did this when I ran with all the other candidates. Edwin Edwards, the whole group that we ran in '87. So how this whole thing shakes out is what's going to be so fascinating for all of us to watch. But as Jeff says, he hit it right in the head. This race is far from over.
Jeff, Jim mentioned about the vindictiveness of David Vitter, and I wrote about that actually the other day, and I'm just wondering, is that gonna play out? I mean, I know we all have talked about it. I'm just wondering, is that going to play out? Okay,
Steve, repeat the question for me one more time.
Okay, my question is this. Jim Brown mentioned about David Vitter being vindictive. And so my question is, and I wrote about that, and I think he's the most vindictive Louisiana politician that I know. So I think that many of us have talked and written about this. Do you think that's going to play out? I mean, is he really liked enough to run against a powerful Republican, such as, and to win against, say, Jay Dardenne? And
let me say this: he's extremely vindictive. I mean, I know from personal experience that he's vindictive, and I think that that's something that the average voter doesn't know, but those in political circles know that. I think that he's been able to exert that kind of power because of the positions that he has. But now that he's going for governor, many people who have been sort of abused by it in the past, I don't think are going to be folks who are going to be lining up to support him. I mean, I think he's made a lot of enemies over the years in Louisiana politics, and those folks are going to find a candidate to support, and it's not going to be David Vitter.
That's really interesting. I mean, it really is. I mean, you're politically speaking, you probably have more akin to David Vitter than any of the candidates who have announced. And you're a strong a strong
I
Tea Party person, and David Vitter needs a Tea Party crowd like he got, during the last election when he beat the Democrat.
I think John Kennedy is certainly right. Chris John and Charlie Melanson, the two he beat, but I think that John Kennedy is someone who is reform-oriented, has got a lot of good ideas. I think he would love to be governor, but I don't know if he sees a road to be governor with Vitter. I know Jay Dardenne has a lot of support within Republican circles, but Vitter is more conservative. But some of those folks who might be ideologically in tune with Vitter might be more likely to support Dardenne or someone else just because of the icy relationship that he's got with some people. So that's why I'm saying I don't think we're going to have a coronation. I think there are just too many people that would not like to see him governor.
Jim, let me ask you a question. I mean, you're a former Secretary of State, Insurance Commissioner, legislator, and I'm just wondering, given your experience in Baton Rouge, can a person with that kind of negativity, in terms of personal negativity, can a person like that just turn it around? And we're not even talking about his his sin baggage. We're just talking about his personality. Can he work together with members of the legislature and others? He hasn't been able to work with anybody, to my knowledge, certainly not in the U.S. Senate, and certainly not anybody who may disagree with him about something.
Well, he's